welcome to the ICT Pulse podcast. I'm Michelle Marius, your host and the editor and publisher of ICT Pulse, the online platform where we discuss ICT issues from a Caribbean perspective. Earlier in the year, Trinidad and Tobago film and television distributor FILMCO announced the launch of a new Caribbean streaming platform, FILMCO2Go, which will be streaming Caribbean films and TV shows to the world. I'm not aware of another Caribbean-based or Caribbean-focused video streaming service, so I'm excited to explore this new and exciting development in the region's ICT space. We're delighted to have on the podcast one of the co-founders of FILMCO, Mariel Brown, who is also an award-winning filmmaker and director of the creative and production company Savant and Savant Films, and has been working in film and television for over 20 years. Mariel.
Hi. Gosh, it makes me sound old. Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. So, Mariel, just to start us off, tell us a bit of your story and what drove you and the other co-founders to set up FILMCO.
Well, I have been working as an independent documentary filmmaker since about 2003. And I was making a cooking and lifestyle program, and then I started making one-off documentary films and documentary series as well. Having got my start in the newsroom at Trinidad and Tobago Television in 1997. And although I loved television, and I have always loved it, and I've loved film, it is just really not a viable career choice in the Caribbean. And, to stick it out, if you're not making advertisements or music videos, it's very, very difficult to earn a living as a filmmaker, and particularly as a documentary filmmaker, because my interest in general is on creating work rather than producing work that is commissioned. And so, because there are so many stories that I want to explore as a filmmaker. And of course, commissioned work, although it can help you pay the bills, it's often about like corporate documentaries, and they very rarely sort of dovetail into your interests, in my experience, although I've been very lucky to have a client in Trinidad and Tobago, the Parliament Channel, for whom I've done a few pieces of commissioned work, which was, they were thoroughly enjoyable, wonderful projects to work on. That's been the exception, not the rule. So I would say that having spent all this time really struggling to make a living as a filmmaker in Trinidad, we recognized, and of course, I'm very friendly with lots of people in our local industry. Our industry is small, just like it is in Jamaica, where everybody knows everybody else. And so we would talk about the need to have some sort of organization that would represent for our needs and for our, basically advocate for the position of filmmakers in Trinidad and Tobago as kind of part of the cultural landscape, as a necessary part of the cultural landscape that is worthy of sort of recognition and some sort of sustainable livelihood. And so in 2016, through a sort of strange route, a few of us got together, myself, Dion Bucco, Leslie Ann McFarlane, and at the time a Trinidadian filmmaker called Sean Hodgkinson, and Danielle Diffentala, and we started entering into negotiations with the national television station in Trinidad at the time, CNNG, to try and see if there was a way that we could come up with a model for how we could get local and Caribbean television and film content licensed for broadcast on television, which means the television station would pay license fees, which means the filmmakers and television producers would earn revenue. Because that's the massive, gaping, missing link in the English-speaking Caribbean's film industry pipeline, or the film industry chain, there is no value really at the end of the project. What people tend to do is they tend to fundraise enough money to cover production costs, barely, and then they treat that as a salary. And then when the film is done, they put it out into the world with really little or no expectation of earning revenue. And of course, a film is a commodity; it's a product, and the idea that one wouldn't treat it as a product which has a value and which can earn revenue seemed completely unfair to us and frankly absurd. But there just has not been the ability to monetize content in the region. And so we formed FILMCO formally in 2017. Myself, Dion Bucco, Leslie Ann McFarlane, and Danielle Devantala. We were just a group of 4 people who have worked in the industry. Danielle, myself, and Dion since the 1990s. In fact, Danielle since the 1980s, and then Leslie Ann is the youngest person. And we just, we started actively lobbying and advocating for license fees for content on television, particularly Trinidad and Tobago television. Because, Michelle, I'm not sure if you're aware, but the model in the Caribbean, in the English-speaking Caribbean, tends to be, give us your content for free and we'll put it on television for you, or pay for the airtime and we'll put it on television for you. It never is, which is what it is just about everywhere else in the world. I value that your content helps me reach my mandate of building audiences and earning revenue from my television station. Therefore, I will pay for the product, right? And of course, we see this as fundamentally disrespectful and inequitable. And we've been trying to change that paradigm bit by bit, but it's very, very difficult. And although we were able to sign a 1-year contract with TTT that earned revenue for over 80 filmmakers in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean, several folks from Jamaica as well, TTT basically wheedled out of the agreement as soon as they possibly could. And it was such a challenging contract to deliver that we sort of were forced to ask ourselves, well, if we're going to have to be arguing and fighting to get this on television forever, should we be exploring other avenues for getting our content out into the world? And that's where FILMCO2Go was born. We formed a technical partnership with the provider Tego TV that's based in Trinidad and Tobago. It's an online platform. And we launched FILMCO2Go in February, an online streaming service that is a subscription-based service available to anyone, anywhere in the world, where you subscribe and you can watch as much content as often as you like during that subscription period.
Fantastic. I mean, as you're talking and, as a Caribbean person, I certainly feel a certain loyalty to Caribbean content. And, unfortunately, just as a member of the viewing audience, it's difficult to find that content when you need it or when you would like to watch it. Sometimes, yes, you watch all of what is produced overseas and developed countries, but from time to time, what you may want to just, bask in, your sort of local, regional culture and stories. And certainly, I think for people in the diaspora, that might be even more important and more needed. So, and what I'm also noticing, and even for myself, sometimes, you may have watched a film from back in the day and, it would be really nice to have access to it again, but, you don't know where to find it and that sort of thing. It's almost as if sometimes that the content is produced, it airs once and it's never to be seen again. So sometimes you really wonder about things like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we posit the view that actually Caribbean content is as important to people within the region as it is to Caribbeans in the diaspora. It's hard to sort of put a finger on how germane television and films in which we are represented to identity formation. And I think that as a region, we are often adrift in the sense of our own selfhood and our own identities. And I think that I made a television series, a 3-part series on our first Prime Minister, our first Trinidad and Tobago Prime Minister. It was called Inward Hunger, the story of Eric Williams. And a friend of mine, who very educated, very erudite, came up to me after he saw the film and he said, "My God, I just realized I know more about John F. Kennedy than I know about Eric Williams." And that is because American culture is absolutely ubiquitous.
Yes.
And it is ubiquitous because of television. It is not an accident. And so how do we represent for ourselves and for the world who we are? And television and film are powerful mechanisms for disseminating those kinds of stories, and to my mind, essential. So we need to see ourselves represented on screen. We need to understand, nobody questions what the World Trade Center was in America and the scar that the 9/11 left, on many things, but on the landscape for certain, and of the New York skyline. It had become part of the visual language of New York. When we think about New York, we thought about the World Trade Center, the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building. Everybody knows those places. What do we as Caribbean people think of when we think of Kingston? Do we think of Halfway Tree, the clock at Halfway Tree? Do we think of the Emancipation Park sculpture? What do we think of, and how are those messages reinforced, if not through film and television? And that idea of visual iconography can be applied in every realm of life, to your accent, the language you use, the way you approach your daily life, what you see as valuable, what you undervalue, how you view your fellow citizens. All of this is part of identity building, which we simply have not, and I put this squarely at the feet of our national television stations. We have just completely abdicated responsibility. And so if people don't know more about the story of Eric Williams, it's because there haven't been people making enough films. And even when those films are made, they're not on television enough. We have to take some responsibility. Luckily, Inward Hunger has basically been on television consistently since I made it for the past 10 years. But that's unusual in the Caribbean context.
Yes. And I guess, one of the questions that I had listed to ask you was really about whether or not we are telling our stories enough. And clearly we are not. But and I think, you've really made some solid points there. And I hope, our listeners take them to heart, because, here it is that, and let me ask though, here it is that we may not necessarily be making enough content. Do you make a distinction in your mind between what people might be doing, let's say, on Instagram and social media, YouTube, in terms of having their channels and followers and those sorts of things, and I guess film and television might be a bit more structured, but in terms of us telling our stories, do you think that we are leveraging all of those channels enough, or in terms of maybe the stories that we are telling? What are your thoughts?
I'm a huge fan of YouTube. I watch loads of YouTube videos. But just in the sense of fact checking and having a producer guiding the way the content is made, YouTube cannot do those things. Most content producers on YouTube are one person with a crappy camera and a not so great microphone, and maybe a camera person who is not a cinematographer, but somebody who knows how to operate a camera in the most basic sense, standing up in front of camera and speaking their opinions, which may or may not be valid and which may or may not be informed. I cannot tell you how distressing. I mean, YouTube is the new frontier, right? It's like, open streaming platforms are like the wild, wild west where sort of anything goes. And to me, that is exciting, but also dangerous. It's dangerous for language. It's dangerous for fact. It's dangerous for truth. And I feel as though simply because of the stakes and money involved in television and streaming platforms such as Netflix, etc., there is an urgency about quality and rigor that simply doesn't exist on YouTube. Like, I mean, I just can't tell you how many videos I've seen where people have just used the wrong words. They think they're using the right language. They're using the completely wrong language. They don't understand the words they're using. They're giving bad advice. They're misremembering the names of people, of historical figures. I mean, YouTube is wonderful, is a blessing and a curse all at once.
Yeah.
And so I think that there will always be a huge need for productions of value, because productions of value do many things. You have, when I make a series, for example, a historical series, I have a historian on my team who goes through each of my scripts for accuracy and correctness, who corrects me if I'm wrong. I have researchers working with me who are reading widely and pulling information widely. And then I have my own personal knowledge. And then we have all the people that we interview. So, I mean, there are all these levels at which one is being challenged to do better. And the problem with YouTube is just one isn't challenged to do better. I could put up a little video of me playing a video game and get 1 million hits. What's the challenge for you to do better there? So I think YouTube is really interesting, but I do think it's the wild, wild west.
Mm.
And I think also if you monetize content on YouTube, which I have been doing for many years with my television show Sound Coach, I think it's an uneven relationship. I think these streaming platforms hold all the power. Producers hold very little power. I can tell you that Amazon Prime and Amazon Channels and that the distribution of rights and royalties and commissions is never as fair as it ought to be, as advantageous to the filmmaker or content producer as it ought to be. So we are in an exciting, unknown, challenging moment in which there is a lot of structure that needs to be put in place to make the landscape more fair for the people who are actually making things. And when I say making things, I mean hiring a crew and making things of sound production value, and that can add to our cultural understanding of this moment or any moment, really.
Understood. And just going back now to FILMCO2Go, which is giving us an option here in the region, how is it structured? How much content is currently available to subscribers?
I'm not sure what you mean when you say how is it structured, but FILMCO2Go, as I said, is a partnership with Tego TV, the online platform Tego TV. And essentially, FILMCO2Go is an attempt to aggregate and share content from the Caribbean in an intensive and curated way. if you want to go, if you know one film from a Caribbean filmmaker, one film does not an industry make. So one or two films from Caribbean filmmakers may be up on Amazon Prime, but there is no way, or Vimeo Plus, there is no way, nowhere for those for those audiences to go once they've seen that one film. You've lost them. They may be looking out for your next one film, but you've got to be able to collect the material together to give audiences a destination for this kind of story, this kind of content, which we think FILMCO2Go offers, a destination for content made about and by people from the Caribbean and the Caribbean diaspora. And so our hope is that if we're able to get the word out enough and build the visibility of the offering enough, then it will become sustainable. But, the truth is, Michelle, that online platforms never earn the kind of revenue for filmmakers, certainly not in the first few years, that, say, a television broadcast will earn. But it is the future, and this is why we have decided to embrace it.
Okay, great.
So how do you access it? So basically, you go to the FILMCO.org/FILMCO2Go landing page, and you can click on there are three different subscription packages, and that takes you through to Tego TV's platform, where you choose your subscription package, which is either 1 month, 3 months, or 12 months, and then you download the Tego TV app and log in using your account, and you're able to access all the titles we have. We currently have approximately 80 titles on the platform. When I say 80 titles, that, put in brackets 4 seasons of Westwood Park at, let's say, 15 episodes per season, 4 seasons of Sankosh, several multi-episode programs. So I think we have well over 100 hours of content on the platform at this point.
Fantastic. And how does FILMCO2Go plan to acquire content for the platform? Can individuals submit content? How does that work?
Yes, obviously, FILMCO is one of the pillars of our organization is distribution. And so we already distribute the content of roughly 80 to 90 people, 80 to 90 filmmakers. Some filmmakers will have multiple titles. A filmmaker like Ida Douche from the Netherlands, who does a lot of work in the Dutch Caribbean. And on the Dutch Caribbean, she has 5 or 6 titles that we represent. Poetry is an Island about Jack Walcott, Amsterdam Traces of Sugar. She's got several titles that we represent. So in the first instance, we have been adding titles that are already in our catalog, but we are always looking for new titles. And so if people want to submit to us, we welcome submissions, and we've actually accepted a few new submissions in the last month. You just have to write to distribution@filmco.org with a synopsis or description of your series or film and a screener and contact information, and we will see if there's a way that we can, if we think that it works with the kind of content that we're looking for, and if we think it has a place on FILMCO2Go.
Okay. And just in terms of the type of content, it really has to be Caribbean-based stories, or I noted that you mentioned about films content being produced by the diaspora, but is that films that they're producing about other things, or it has to be Caribbean-focused, Caribbean stories related?
It has to be Caribbean focused. Yeah. So you could be an English filmmaker and you come to Trinidad and you made 5 films about Trinidad Carnival, or you go to Jamaica and made 5 films about reggae music and dancehall. We count that as Caribbean content. But it has to be about the Caribbean. It has to be situated in the Caribbean experience.
Okay. And what about, just generally, you being a creative, and, FILMCO2Go, for me is really tech, which is why I was so excited to have you on. What is it like running a creative tech business in Trinidad and Tobago?
Difficult, very, very difficult. The Trinidad and Tobago government talks about digital transformation, but they really have no idea what that actually means. And FILMCO2Go is simply one of the things that FILMCO does. We also manage the annual Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival, which last year ran completely online. And, simple issues like the fact that you cannot encash PayPal payments in any Trinidad and Tobago bank. This is a massive hindrance to international e-commerce. Massive. And so I think the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and I suspect elsewhere in the Caribbean, has a lot to learn about what it actually means to run businesses whose lives exist on the internet. And I currently live in the UK, and I was able to set up a company online. I didn't need to go anywhere. I was able to register my car, get it licensed online. I'm able to book tickets for any event online. I'm able to receive payments for things I have sold or anything like that online. I even have a business account with an online bank. In Trinidad, you still have to present yourself in person to your bank for many business transactions, let alone anything involving government business, government transactions, car licensing, tax paying, etc., etc. And so, although there are pockets of people and companies in Trinidad and Tobago that are actively and embracing technology and digital technologies and online technologies as the tools of the 21st century, Trinidad is very, very far away from, to my mind at least, having an environment which supports the use of digital technology, where digital technology is a central aspect of everyone's life in Trinidad. It's very, very difficult. And one of the challenges is government inflexibility and the lack of understanding of what is required to create a truly technologically driven society. Uber was in Trinidad briefly, I think, and Uber just pulled out because they just said, well, what's the point? If you think of how you interact with Uber, you order an Uber through an app, you put your credit card details on Uber, and then you don't pay cash. Your credit card gets debited when you take a taxi drive in an Uber, when you get an Uber. Those things simply don't exist. That the framework to allow that kind of transaction to take place simply doesn't exist in Trinidad. And although the government has made loud noises about digital transformation in the last two budgets, support for organizations that are embracing digital technologies seems to me to be almost non-existent. So it's not easy. I would say it's really not easy. You are basically doing this on your own without real infrastructural or financial support.
That seems to be the experience across the region because, it's not necessarily just about digital businesses, that are struggling or finding it difficult to operate within the region, but those such as FILMCO and FILMCO2Go that are sort of focused on a global audience. And unfortunately, what you're finding is that to be able to have the seamless sort of transactions between the markets that you want to embrace, you have to position your business to be able to do so, and it cannot be done from in the region. And here it is that all of our countries are faced with revenue challenges and so on, but some other countries' pockets are getting filled by Caribbean businesses, Caribbean ideas, Caribbean ventures that cannot find a place within the region. So that I find is unfortunate.
I mean, I think it's for me. It became, we use as our payment portal. We use a Trinidadian service called WePay, which I think is launching around the islands. And I think a couple of banks in Trinidad have started trying to find and offering digital solutions for receiving payments for transactions, right? Financial transactions.
Right.
But they're very expensive. But we used WePay as one of our payment portals for the film festival last year. Now here we are, we have a completely online festival, and we are selling tickets using WePay for the films. And 1 in every 5 or 6 transactions doesn't go through because there's a problem with the app. I mean, do you understand the problems?
Yes.
I mean, imagine if I went to try and pay my money on Amazon and it didn't work. Wouldn't I just jump and go away somewhere else? I wouldn't even bother. You've just made it to the thing about digital technology is it's so easy to give you my money, but it's equally easy to give it to someone else. And so if you have what I want, but you are not ready to receive my revenue, then I'll go and find someone else who is. And I feel like that is really tragic. I mean, another thing that I do is I produce books on contemporary art in the Caribbean with my business partner, Melanie Archer. I mean, and simply fulfilling orders for post within the region, it's so expensive. We've been using WePay as our payment portal, and so that works fine. But, the national borders of Trinidad have been closed for over a year now. And so there is no international mail leaving Trinidad. I mean, it's just...
Really? I mean, I knew the borders were closed, but it's like I thought it was just for like visitor, flights and let's say cruise ships. Wow.
No, I mean, I'll give you a joke. I sent Christmas cards to my friends and colleagues in Trinidad in December. One Christmas card arrived a week ago. And that is because planes are not coming into Trinidad, and there are very, very few are leaving Trinidad. And so unfortunately, I've seen Trinidad. I mean, I've been in England, but because I conduct business in Trinidad and my work is in Trinidad, I've definitely felt Trinidad falling further and further behind in the last year. And it's going to be very hard to pick up. I mean, banks have closed, lines at banks are inordinately long. Again, the same problem about digital payments, digital transactions. I mean, Trinidad is not in a great place right now.
Understood. And as we begin to draw this conversation to a close, I wanted to just find out, so where would you like to see FILMCO2Go in the next 3 to 5 years?
I mean, we would like to build a healthy subscriber base that is excited about films and television shows from the Caribbean, that's loyal, that spreads word of mouth about the platform, and where filmmakers and content producers from the Caribbean are really starting to see some fair and useful financial returns based on their own personal levels of investment in their work. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see thousands of subscribers and our subscriber list growing and growing every month. And I would just like to be able to show those same television stations that have been taking advantage of us for so long, look, this is what we can do. This is what we have done, and we don't need you anymore. I'd like that very much. That would give me a lot of pleasure. I think that would give all our founders at FILMCO a great deal of pleasure. And also to say to Caribbean people, look what we did. We made this happen. Look at what we can do when we put our minds to it. I think we want FILMCO2Go to work very, very much.
I want that as well, definitely. And just my final question, what should, the Caribbean region be doing to really help to advance our content? Here it is that, I think we spoke earlier about perhaps we're not telling the stories that we need to tell. We know more about what is going on overseas, especially like in the United States and US culture, than we do about our own history and culture. So what would probably be some steps or considerations you would like the region to take on board moving forward?
I mean, I would love to see CARICOM countries devise and implement film and television development programs and put some serious money behind those programs. There are people who love doing this, but they just can't afford to do it. I mean, I'm just pig-headed and stubborn, and I determined that this would be my life, but it has not been easy. And so if the Caribbean region and through CARICOM and companies like Caribbean Export really seek to understand the incredible potential of a thriving regional film industry, and what that means for us telling our own stories and us having gainful employment and making useful and meaningful contributions to our regional economy. Once there is some real money put behind it, people will make. People make even if there's no money. They just don't make another film because they can't afford to. So if you create the supportive environment, they will come. Filmmakers and television producers and directors and storytellers will come. But it's so hard now that the ones who remain are the ones who are like me, just too stubborn and hard-headed to allow logic and practicality to enter the situation. Because it's illogical to be a filmmaker in the Caribbean. Completely illogical. You will not, chances are, the likelihood is you'll not be able to buy a house. You may not be able to buy new cars. You will not be able to get a mortgage. You will not be able to take out loans. I mean, these are things that even people who work at McDonald's can do. So that is where we find ourselves, and that is why people enter the industry and leave so quickly, because it is so hard.
Wow. Well, I guess certainly a sobering words, but I think hopefully that we will take on that challenge, because I think it's so crucial for future generations to understand what we are about as a region, who we are, and the history that we have had experience and shared across so many generations. And our sense of identity is going to be captured in the stories, the films, the content that we create. So I think that it is so urgent, I think, especially now with us becoming such a globalized environment, that we have to ensure that our voice is at least captured and hopefully heard by those around us.
I mean, not just for future generations, Michelle, for now too. For now too.
Yes. Wow. Mariel, this has just been an absolute pleasure. I mean, congratulations to you and your co-founders for setting up FILMCO and FILMCO2Go, because, I think it's the sort of thing sometimes, and, with visionaries, you give people things that they don't think that they need, and it's only a little later on that hopefully, your subscriber base will grow, in ways that you had not even anticipated. And I think just the value that FILMCO2Go can add to the region and to providing creators with a platform to tell their stories, Caribbean-based stories, I think is just so fantastic. So just thank you again for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Michelle.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the ICT Pulse podcast. You can find links to some of the things we talked about on our website, ict-pulse.com. If you like this episode, please show your support by leaving us a review on iTunes, as it will help others find the show. You can email us at info@ict-pulse.com or drop us a note on our Facebook page, facebook.com/ICTPulse, or via Twitter @ICTPulse. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode. Take care.